So, hello everyone, once again to the What We Are Reading YouTube channel of the South American Mycorrhizal Research Network. Today we have with us a different interview, not strictly mycorrhizal interview, as we sometimes do. And we again have Professor Matthias Rillig from the Free University of Berlin in Germany. Matthias, of course, is very productive and he has been interested in things outside mycorrhizas as well, or more general in how science works. And for that, you can check his YouTube channel, Life in Academia. And in that regard, he wrote an article in PLOS Computational Biology entitled 10 Simple Routes for Fostering Creativity in Research Labs. I really like the article, and I have been thinking about creativity for a while as well in the scientific world. So that immediately caught my attention. I will try to do this interview short, and what I will do is to read the 10 simple rules and then let Matthias explain them. So the first rule is foster a healthy open lab culture.
Right. I mean, I've been very interested in the topic of creativity as well, and I've been teaching a class for the masters in creativity in the sciences because it occurred to me that we never teach people about the other side of doing science. We start basically from experimental design, how to pipette A to B, but we don't talk about where the ideas come from. Maybe that's sort of the prelude to why this paper happened in the first place. And the first part, the first rule, the article title is prescribed by this article series, 10 Simple Rules. I don't think any of them are simple, and they're certainly not rules. It's almost counterproductive to call them rules when it's about creativity. But that's just dictated by that article series in PLOS Computational Biology, just as an explainer. And that first rule is basically, I mean, it's very helpful if you have an open and friendly lab environment and not a toxic environment, because in a toxic environment, people will be like afraid to speak up, and it will be a culture of fear, and an unproductive, unhealthy lab environment, I think, will not be good for creative thoughts, because people are busy with other stuff, like not saying something wrong or not being on the wrong side of stuff. So I think that goes without saying that you need a healthy lab. You need an open culture where people are comfortable, verbalizing their ideas and speaking up, for example, in all kinds of different settings.
Excellent. Yes, I very much agree. If you are always afraid or of saying something, of course you will not be as creative. Um, the second one that you wrote was value creative input.
Yeah, I mean, there is often sort of this thing that you hear, ideas are a dime a dozen, right? You can have ideas to no end, and I never agree with that, because ideas are not a dime a dozen. Maybe ideas sort of generally, yeah, we can all, like, now Caesar and I, we can come up with like 10, 20 ideas on what the next mycorrhiza experiment should be, and every one of you could as well. But basically, very good ideas are super rare. And so I think you can only have good ideas if you have many ideas. That's the simple logic that's been shown many, many times. And so in order to produce many ideas, people need to be comfortable saying the ideas. And one way to get people to get comfortable saying ideas, like in settings like a lab meeting, is you value the input by saying, "Oh, cool." It's pretty simple, but I think if people feel that you are interested in their ideas, I think then it makes it much more likely that they're going to share their ideas than if you're not. But I think it's not just the PI. I think the appreciation needs to come from also the other team members. It needs to be sort of the general atmosphere that one tries to create, that like it is cool to have ideas, and if you verbalize an idea and you put yourself out there, which is a very hard in a group setting because people are shy and it's just a human thing that you don't want to put yourself all the way out there in a setting where there's 30, 40 people listening to you. But if you do and you receive positive feedback for having done it, that's important. And I think that's what that says.
Excellent. This third rule, I think, is very related to the two previous ones. Of course, it simply says provide freedom.
Yeah, providing freedom is, I think, is super important. And it is not self-evident how to do that because everybody in this lab has a job to do. You know, they have a grant or a fellowship on which they have to deliver certain milestones and outputs. So it's not like everybody can just do whatever the hell they want. Huh? I mean, everybody has kind of a task that they need to do. But when people come to my lab, they're always told that, you know, once you have basically delivered on your project, or once it seems like you are going to be on your road to delivering on your project, whatever that may be, then you are very much encouraged to do whatever you like. And I think that that's very important to say. And then you feel maybe you also want to support that. If people are curious, this is basically about curiosity. Curiosity is the most important ingredient to creativity. And so if people are curious about stuff beyond their project, that is very, very highly appreciated and is also encouraged.
Excellent. Excellent. That was my experience during my formative years. Yeah. The fourth one, maintain flat hierarchies.
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes back to an amazing thing that my advisor, Mike Allen, said when I joined his lab about 500 years ago, which was, I expect you to prove me wrong.
Nice.
That was a really weird thing to say that at the time didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. And of course, then I made it almost my hobby to prove him wrong on every occasion, which I'm sure he didn't enjoy at any moment. I mean, in the specific moment that was not enjoyable, but it was always accepted. And I think that that is like, for me, quintessentially what a flat hierarchy should be. It is extremely unproductive if people don't speak up when they know that something that I've said is wrong, but they just don't say anything because I am the PI. And there was one moment when that really happened in the lab meeting. I don't think it says that in the paper, but there was like several years ago, I said something with, you know, my convincing PI voice that a couple of people in the room knew to be wrong, and they didn't say anything. It was only afterwards they said like, I think that actually that wasn't right. And that really that gave me pause, basically, that I thought we had a very flat hierarchy, but, you know, unless you constantly work on it, it's constantly a piece of work to make clear that if you know that something I've said is wrong, you should tell me, then this will happen. Right? I mean, and it did happen in my lab, and I thought I had a very flat hierarchy. So it's important to always emphasize that point. And that's what I mean, because then if people don't speak up when you go and take a wrong turn, that is terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I'm a new PI since the last 3 years, and I sometimes feel awkward when students won't speak up and won't tell me that I'm wrong, and also I feel that sometimes they are. I mean, it's nice that they are respectful, but
Exactly.
sometimes it's too
Yep.
much. Sometimes it's kind of excessive. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
agree. The fifth one is assemble diverse teams and use a range of approaches.
Mhm. Yeah, so I mean, by basically this goes back to the basic tenet of what creativity is. Creativity is basically defined as connecting usually two different things that haven't been brought together in that way that is novel and useful. That is the definition of creativity. So in order to do that, you need different inputs. And there's another rule that also speaks to that specifically. But in this case, it's about the people who are in the lab. And the people in the lab are quite diverse in terms of the countries that they're from and what life experiences they bring. And that's important. I think we had at one point people from 20 different countries. And I haven't counted lately how many it is now. But it's definitely quite international. People come from totally different backgrounds. And sometimes they have amazing things to say on exactly the same topic where, I would have never thought of that. And that is, of course, extremely helpful. That is just basically their personal background and what nation they are from. But there is more to that diversity. I think that is just as important, I think, and that is the approach they use. So we have some people that are much more statistically minded, much more data synthesis focused. Some people are much more experimental. Some people do observational studies. Some people work on forests. Some people work on grasslands. Some people work on agricultural systems. So there's quite a range of topics. Some people focus really on fungi. Some people focus on the saprobic fungi. Some people on mycorrhizal fungi. So we are, of course, a rather large team, but it is also rather diverse in terms of the approaches people use. That was quite important for resilience of the lab during terrible times, like when the lab was shut down during the Corona times. Incidentally, our lab is currently shut down because of a major power outage affecting several buildings. It has been for days, so it's an extremely stressful situation for me right now. These are not my books. These are some other person's books, and I'm in another office in another building right now. So there's always these calamities that seem to strike, and I think that sort of diversity of approaches, some theoretical and some empirical, also leads to the lab as a whole be more resilient, but it also leads to the lab be, as a whole, have more opportunities for creativity because you can connect more different dots.
I also agree a lot, and I think that about 4 or 5 years ago, I like to write in many different disciplines, and some years ago when I was looking for a permanent position, something that struck to me was that um, the positions that people look for tend to be very, very specific, like not just plant and microorganisms interactions, but like a molecular tool in plant microbes interactions and so on. So I think that once you are a PI, you can have the liberty to assemble these diverse fields and diverse expertises and approaches. But definitely, there is something in the academic atmosphere that kind of goes against that, kind of requires people to be extremely specialized, and that's not good, I think.
I think that is, I completely agree. I mean, absolutely 100%. And, even at a place of learning, of a university, a place of basically learning about all disciplines, it's very rare that you meet a colleague in a setting other than when there is like a grant proposal to write at the university level, where you just have a chat. So I find it very difficult. I've been thinking about that for a long time. It is most unfortunate. You need to find some like-minded spirits that you can connect with. That's at another level. This is what I'm talking about within the research team.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is exactly right. I mean, everybody is basically, the rewards are overwhelmingly highly disciplinary.
Yeah, definitely. The sixth rule is provide resources.
Yeah, I think providing resources refers to when people do want to go off on their side projects, which people are encouraged to do. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is the provide freedom. But sometimes in order to do these side projects, you need some investments upfront. Sometimes not, but sometimes you do. You need a piece of equipment or you need some supply money. And so I think it is a very good strategy. And of course, we've been very lucky to be able to do that. Quite a lot here is to set aside money from like indirect cost refund or something like that to specifically use for this purpose. When we want to start a new research line, basically we can. We don't need to write a grant proposal. We can just do it. And I think that, at some level, I think everybody can always set a little bit of funding aside if it's at all possible within the system within which you have to operate. But that is essential, I think, so that you become agile and you can really pursue ideas as they come up. I think this is what I meant by that.
Nice. The seventh rule is ensure broad inspiration and diverse inputs.
Right. I mean, the diverse inputs and broad inspiration can be from the people in the lab. This was one of these previous rules, but this one refers to inputs more from the outside. And so, this can take all kinds of shapes and forms. I mean, we've been interacting a lot with artists. Not that I'm specifically interested in art. I'm becoming more interested in art now, ironically enough, but I wasn't specifically interested in that when I started interacting with artists. I interacted with artists mostly because they're quite different from me, and therefore they can ask questions and make comments that would have never come up with. And that has literally started entire research lines in this lab that we've been pursuing for years now. And that doesn't happen every time, huh? Just like creativity is a difficult topic to teach because you cannot say like, do this, and then you will have an amazing idea. No, you do something and then, some idea may arrive. You just can only create situations conducive to the arrival of an idea. You cannot make it happen. And so these are all things that make the idea happening much more likely. And one is to get into the lab people that are different from you. I think it's not that important that they're artists, quite frankly. It's just somebody totally different from you. We also had a philosopher in residence recently, and I think that I've also gotten many ideas from talking to journalists, actually, because they have a way of asking questions, obviously. It's their job. And so they do that quite well. They're quite inquisitive and curious. And I think so that is one way. The other way is what we read in our lab meetings. I pick the paper based on also suggestions made by the group for our journal club every week. And sometimes we read papers outside of the immediate, subject area of the lab. And so that has also really been, quite important. I think we read this paper mentioning microplastic many, many years ago, and that has now given rise to this idea to microplastic in soil, and that has definitely taken off. And a lot of people in the lab are working on this now, like more than 10 years later. But that started by reading a paper, and that was not like in our field, for example. There's many other examples where you get these inputs from reading these papers. We always read this horizon scanning paper by Bill Sutherland and co-authors because they basically have done the work for you. It was exactly one of these papers that mentioned microplastic, for example. And so this is kind of the choice of papers you read in your lab meeting. I make it a point to sometimes read also much more general papers or papers that are not exactly in our field. We also, for a while, I was thinking about the idea of inviting people from across campus to these meetings, but it's such a hassle. And the probability that something will come of it is rather low. And so whenever you have a low probability of an outcome to be positive, you need to do something high throughput in order to make it worth it. And so the idea of having like just this rank and file of people from across the different departments show up in our lab meetings is unattractive, I think, for all involved and not practical. But I think that would be another thing to, dream up some sort of a format where that is possible. But, giving a talk in a lab meeting, I don't think is it. Yeah, but it is like exposing yourself to basically different inputs. This incidentally was my choice of sabbatical for this year, something very scary to go to some place where I don't know anybody. This is not, I don't enjoy the thought. To be honest, but I picked a place where I don't know anybody so that all connections will be new. And so I think that is in the same vein, expose yourself to new things so you can make these new and unusual connections.
Yeah, no, I have been having the same experiences with philosophers. Actually this year I will attend my first like global philosophy of biology conference in Portugal, and it's so different. Although they are speaking about things that I know pretty well, it's a different language, a different
Hmm.
world, and it's very challenging. I like those challenges. The eighth is very related to your previous answer, but maybe you can tell us a little bit more. What do you mean by creativity techniques? The eight is apply creativity techniques.
Yeah, so when I taught this class, of course, we need to fill it also with content, not just, light candles and wait for inspiration and go on walks in the botanical garden. But there is actually a lot of creativity techniques of which I've never heard, right? Because, of course, we're not taught this stuff. And they're mostly geared at, a much more entrepreneurial audience, companies and things like that. But there is a slew of creativity techniques. I think the only thing we ever did in lab meetings was brainstorming, but there's also brain writing, which is the silent version of brainstorming, where everybody works on a piece of paper and you hand it around, and then it's not dominated by the people that like to speak, but everybody writes and can build on it, and everybody writes at the same time. So it's actually quite time effective. But there's many other techniques like the different thinking hats. There's entire books written on this topic, and I read some of them. And but the list of these creativity techniques is very long, and the students just researched a bunch of them, and I mentioned a couple of them in the paper. But there is a lot of them. Some of them are individual level, so what you can do in order to make your thoughts have more creative outputs, or it can be group level. There is both, and some of them work for either one. To give you one example of something that I never heard of is the so-called Zwicky box. Never heard of that before, but it actually turns out that this is something that I have done. I just didn't know that thing had a name, and that it was basically to deconstruct an issue, a concept, or something into its components, and then basically rearrange these components and look for different combinations of things. There is also, this is, I think, a book written by somebody, or at least an article, and this can be much more refined. And we have had some exercises, for example, in the class to test this out. But there is a lot you can do. And also on one of my Substack newsletter posts, I collect ideas from reading papers that we thought are creative, or whenever we had a creative idea, I try to identify what exactly was that, and then make it basically systematic. Like, this was what led to this idea in the more general sense, like asking a question about a broader range of levels. For example, when people just usually do high and low, maybe you do 30 different levels and you come up with some completely different answer. Ask questions about totally different scales or whatever. So I think there can be recipes, basically, is what that means. And people have thought about them a lot. There's a lot of research on these topics that, in neurobiology and psychology, this is an industry concerned with these techniques. There's books, review papers, it's vast. Many websites, most of them are available for free. And this is what I mean. You can tap into that and adapt it for scientific purposes.
I didn't knew that either. So yeah, it shows that we are again very focused in our own field. Then I will finish just asking you about the last two. The ninth one is provide a dedicated space for creativity, and the tenth one, I think that you have been is quite clear that you do this. That is lead by example.
Yeah, I think for me, leading by example means just people are interested. They know I'm interested in it in my lab, because I say it all the time. If you have ideas, I'm very interested in ideas, and I also share my ideas all the time. So I think that is clear to anybody in the lab, that that's valued and that I'm interested in it. Yeah, and provide a dedicated space. I think that we are practicing that at our journal club meetings when we discuss a paper, and then at the end we usually reserve half an hour or 15 minutes or whatever it is, where everybody basically knows that now comes the time where you can generate ideas based on the paper that we've just read. So there's basically a dedicated time in every lab meeting where we basically dedicate to the development of ideas. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Matthias, and thank you everyone for listening. And I will leave the link of the article below. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thanks very much. Thanks. Bye.